guys? I'm Thomas Mott. Welcome into the Thomas Mott Show on a Wednesday. I have a great interview coming up here in just a second. Did it 2 days ago with RJ Ochoa, managing editor of bloggingtheboys.com. One of the best Cowboy beat writers out there. Really fun to go Eagles versus Cowboys. Disclaimer, though, why I'm shooting this before the actual show is because it was filmed and recorded right before the Jalen Hurts shoulder sprain injury even existed. So we had no idea. So we will talk a little bit about Jalen Hurts in this interview. Not a ton, but we don't mention the injury, and that's why, because the show was shot before that. So I'm traveling today, back home for Christmas on a Wednesday. That's why you're seeing this show pre-recorded, but just know that we didn't talk about Jalen Hurts, but it's still a great interview going into the NFC playoffs, going into Dallas, and the importance of this football game, so stay tuned for that. Give the show a thumbs up. What's up, guys? Thomas Mott here. Welcome to the Thomas Mott Show on a Wednesday. We are joined by RJ Ochoa, editor-in-chief, or managing editor of bloggingtheboys.com, one of the best Dallas Cowboy websites, in my opinion. Even if I'm not a Cowboy fan, RJ, at least give you that. It is really my go-to for any sort of Cowboy news and information. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Thomas. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and yours. I got to say, when we first met, it took a long time for you to let me know that you were an Eagles fan. So I feel like you were hiding in plain sight. It's a very fun week. Although I'm going to be honest, I'm no longer as pumped for this game as I was, just a few days ago. It's just kind of the way things have gone as of late.
I am too. I mean, this was really going to be the game of the year. It's still going to be great. I mean, let's just not get that wrong. It still matters for both football teams. But this was game of the year. This was, oh my gosh, winner's going to win the East. Winner can be the 1 seed. And then you guys didn't hold up your end of the bargain. You listened to the Jaguars yesterday and what was a very, very bizarre game. And that kind of leads me into this first question because obviously a lot of people that watch my show, big Eagle fan. I'm a big Eagle fan. It's very obvious. And so we rip on the Cowboys. We rip on Dak. We say, oh, Dak, interception to end the game. He's terrible, blah, blah, blah. You go back and watch that football game. Dak played pretty darn well. I'm curious where you're at with Dak Prescott 14, 15 games into this season. You've been very consistent and following you on Twitter and, knowing you for as long as I have on where Dak Prescott is in your mind. Has it changed at all the past couple of weeks?
I would say Sunday against Jacksonville, there's an argument that it was his best game of the season. And that sounds obviously stupid, obviously just kind of based on the way it ended. The first half he played was really flawless, I think. And that's just kind of been the story, for his season. He hasn't played, obviously, the 14 games that Dallas has. Thanksgiving Day against the Giants was kind of similar, the first half of that game to the second half against Jacksonville. Kind of a topsy-turvy, turnover-prone game for him up until the second half where he really took control. And, the game-losing interception, obviously not Dak's fault. There's, a lot of people want to get their jokes off and aren't going to admit that or acknowledge that, but It's just kind of the way it goes. And you could sit here and you can argue, he's throwing to Noah Brown, at the very end of this game. That's just kind of the state of the Cowboys receiver group. And that's a bet they made themselves by trading away Amari Cooper. And I think if I have changed my mind on anything relative to Dak, entering this season, you've got Mahomes and Josh Allen, and maybe some people were willing to put Joe Burrow there at the time on one plane. As far as, talent right now, people talk about like legacies with Rodgers and Brady, whatever. I thought for a long time that Dak had the potential to live in that space forever. I think he gets into that space. He plays games. He has games or quarters or moments that are in that space, but he isn't there as consistently, obviously, as those top tier echelon guys. I think he's a notch below that, and we'll see if Jalen Hurts is able to sustain himself to live and operate in that tier over the rest of his career. But I think he's very firmly a top 5 to 8 quarterback, just kind of on the day or the moment or the drive or the series, whatever the case may be.
I think that's really well said. And I think that the national media, they've kind of pigeonholed themselves when it comes to talking about Dak Prescott, right? And this happens with a lot of quarterbacks. And I think Jalen Hurts has been kind of knocked into that hole, at least for this season so far. And you said it. Everyone wants Dak to be in the elite quarterback category 24/7. It's like, if you're not Mahomes, if you're not Burrow, if you're not obviously Josh Allen, then we're going to just rip you up and down. And anytime Dak gets to that level, you see the next day, ESPN, oh my gosh, Dak Prescott, Cowboys, Super Bowl. It's like instantly that's the headline if they blow out somebody. Then as soon as Dak Prescott loses a game, whether yesterday was his fault or not, or Sunday was his fault or not, he instantly gets demoted down to, oh, how terrible is Dak Prescott? And yet what people seem to forget about him, and again, this comes from an Eagles fan, they win games with this guy. It's not like they have terrible records or they're, 500 every single year with Dak Prescott. They've had very successful seasons. I just think that a lot of Cowboy fans and a lot of people in general, like you just said, expect him to always live in this little area of Patrick Mahomes. And when he doesn't, then we get all, like I said, these giant articles saying how terrible Dak Prescott is or not. That brings me to this thought process of, Can the Cowboys win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott? I think the answer is yes. And I think that you would agree it's just going to take a little bit more than just Dak being Dak. He needs Dak plus a running game, or Dak plus elite receivers, or Dak plus a great defense.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I think when it comes to that question, I think it's a pass fail proposition. It's not, well, you have to have a top X guy to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think Matthew Stafford was a top 5 quarterback a season ago, and the Rams won the Super Bowl. And so I certainly think that Dak is in that camp. And I mean, it's so strange. I mean, you mentioned it; it's all or nothing with him, and that makes my job a lot of fun in terms of national perception. But
Yeah.
they're 6-2 since he came back, and obviously they lost to the Eagles with Cooper Rush, and they lost Week 1 to Tampa with Dak. But that game was just really broken in every sense. The 2 losses they've had. And, you can nitpick and you can talk about the games they've won, but they blew a 14-point fourth quarter lead to Green Bay on the road and lost in overtime. They blew a 17-point lead in Jacksonville on the road and lost in overtime. I mean, so for the most part, you can argue that he had them in a position to win all 8 of the games that he's been back for. And again, that's moving some things, that's cherry picking just a little bit. But yeah, I think they absolutely can win with him. And right now, I think, despite what Twitter would tell you, he's the least, he's one of the lower questions that I think anybody should have about this team. I think people are a little bit more concerned about the defense regressing a little bit finally, those takeaways and turnovers not coming, the sacks not coming. Micah Parsons has been a little bit quiet in terms of big, flashy moments. I think that's where people are a little bit more shook right now.
That was kind of going to lead me into the next question here, the regression of the Dallas Cowboy defense. Is that the main issue right now in Dallas? There's this talk of, you mentioned Noah Brown being one of their second leading receiver behind CeeDee Lamb. They should have kept Amari Cooper. They need another wide receiver. Is it more so the fact that they aren't able to score late in these football games, or is the fact that they're giving up points? You mentioned 17-point comeback to the Jaguars. The defense, has it regressed that much?
I think it's a perfect storm, and that's kind of a fence-riding answer, but, for all the defense's, so to speak, flaws, I mean, they pitched a 3-and-out to start overtime on Sunday, right? They did their job, and then Dallas had the pick 6 that lost the game. And so, the defense also forced a turnover late in the game, and the Cowboys went 3-and-out and gave the ball back to Jacksonville, and were aggressive on third down and kept a timeout in Doug Peterson's pocket that proved to be consequential. And so Sunday in particular was just this perfect storm of the right kind of collapses by both the defense and the offense at the right time, or the wrong time for the Cowboys, obviously. And they played a team that was aggressive and able to take advantage of that, obviously, in Jacksonville. And so I would say the biggest bugaboo, and this is definitely a fence-riding answer, but is injuries. I mean, Leighton Vander Esch got hurt, and that really hurt the Cowboys' defense in the middle of it. Anthony Brown is out. Jordan Lewis is out. Micah Parsons. Everybody's dealing with something, but they're just a little bit banged up, and you're starting to see that take its toll.
Do you buy this whole idea, and it was happening in Philadelphia this week, that we're overlooking the Jaguars, we're overlooking the Bears because we're so focused on Eagles-Cowboys, right? This is going to be a trap game because both teams, they should roll the Jags and they should roll the Bears, because Philadelphia struggled too. Jalen Hurts threw 2 interceptions. Did you take any sort of buy into the idea that Dallas was overlooking Jacksonville, getting excited for Philadelphia?
I definitely felt that way about Houston, obviously, now 2 weeks ago. And I don't know that Dallas overlooked Jacksonville last week. They have been very good, generally speaking, at least under Mike McCarthy, of not doing that and of rebounding after they've had an embarrassing moment. And so it kind of felt fitting that, okay, they were a little bit embarrassed by Houston, even though they won, they'll come out and they'll wax Jacksonville. And they were up 27-10. And it kind of felt like, see, I told you, this was the natural rebound for Mike McCarthy's Cowboys. And it felt like at that moment, because that was kind of happening in parallel with Justin Fields' big game and the Montgomery touchdown. You were at least personally in that moment, I was thinking like, okay, Monday I'm going to do this, Tuesday I'm going to do this, like already kind of planning my week of Cowboys Eagles content. And then it seemed like at that moment Dallas took their foot off the gas, and all Jacksonville needed was one half as opposed to an entire game to pull that off. And so I mean, they played with their food, whatever expression you want to utilize there. And they got beat. I think it's important to note they got beat. I mean, they ran into a Jaguars team that's playing great football. Similarly for the Eagles, I mean, Justin Fields is proving that he's not just some flash in the pan. He's obviously a very talented young quarterback. And so it's the NFL. I mean, the Eagles struggle with the Bears. The Chiefs got taken to overtime by the Texans. The Bengals were down 17-0. I mean, to the Bucks. And so it's hard. It's really hard to, you don't necessarily score 33 points in every fourth quarter like Dallas did against Indy.
Yeah, the Chiefs mention there is hilarious to me. I think it's very well said. You watch ESPN this morning, which I don't do every single Monday after a weekend of football, but when big things happen, it's like, all right, what are they going to say? A lot of Cowboy talk, a lot of Eagle talk. There was obviously some Raider talk today. Nothing about the fact that Kansas City almost lost to the Texans. Like, remember Dallas 2 weeks ago was like the entire, shelf to shelf, wall to wall coverage of, Cowboys almost losing, yet the Chiefs, and it's like, they almost lost, but they won, move on. It's just funny how it all works there. Jalen Hurts is, he's polarizing. He's fascinating to me. And I see comparisons to Dak during that, what was it, a 12, 13 win season that Dak had? Was it his second year in the league?
Rookie year, they went 13
rookie year. Right, and Dak played great that time, and it was like Dak elite, and that kind of shoved him out there in terms of comparing him to some of the other great quarterbacks. He's since come back a little bit, as we just mentioned. I don't worry about that with Jalen Hurts. I'm also an Eagle fan, and so my hope is that Jalen Hurts stays at the level he's at right now for the remainder of his career, and that's just what we get. We either have Josh Allen, we have Patrick Mahomes, we have Jalen Hurts. As someone who covers Dallas, but I still consider a very unbiased person when asking this sort of question, do you see Hurts sustaining what he's been able to do this year and just becoming, this is normal Jalen Hurts throughout the rest of his career? Or is it just, too early to tell?
I mean, it's probably too early, but I think there's certainly reason to believe. I think it's unfortunate if that's kind of an aggressive word that it comes at a time where, he's probably going to win MVP and he's going to take that into contract negotiations in the offseason. And it's hard to say no to that. And, it will become all the more polarizing if, hypothetically, I would be very happy about this, but if the Eagles were the 1 seed and lost in the divisional round, right? So it's your MVP, but you folded when the moment was brightest, whatever. That game might be against Dallas. I mean, you never know. I mean, the next month and change are going to be fascinating, but it's so hard to bank on his production on the ground, I think, which is such a big component of who he is. I do think that people overgloss that and say, well, he's just a runner. He's just a running. I don't buy that at all. It did feel that way for a long time. It felt that way for the first 2 years, like he was a slightly elevated Tim Tebow, but he's completely shattered all of that, obviously. But what I would say is, even if you do have doubts, even if you're a pessimist or you're worried about regression, it is hard to regress when you have weapons like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. And so everything, including a top 5 pick, I guess, from New Orleans in all likelihood, is there to fight off whatever inevitable regression is going to come. And so I think there's all the reason in the world to believe. And there's all the reason in the world to buy in. I mean, I don't know how you couldn't be at this point in time. He's fun, and that's what's annoying. When somebody, in this case for me, like Jalen Hurts, is a cool dude and a really likable guy, and kind of, I hate when he embodies the like Philly culture. That would be super cool if you were a Philly fan, but obviously I'm not, so it's super annoying.
Yeah, he is way more likable than Carson Wentz. And I liked Carson Wentz. I don't think Wentz was anything terrible when he was doing that MVP run back in 2017. But there's something about Hurts that really has, I think, galvanized the entire Philadelphia fan base behind him. And, you keep winning like he does. You could be a total jerk and he would still love you. If you were Philadelphia, this is something I talked about on my show yesterday, because let's just assume Philly wins on Saturday, which we'll get in that game in just a second. But let's just say Philly wins on Saturday, which means they lock up the 1 seed. And I think they lock the East up, right? Like, it's done. You still have 2 games left. You have New Orleans, and then you have the Giants, and then a bye week, and then you get into your actual playoff game. So there's 3 weeks until you actually go ahead and play, or sorry, 4 weeks actually, like a month until you play a meaningful football game. How would you handle resting starters if you were coaching the Philadelphia Eagles, right? In a crazy scenario, RJ Ochoa was wearing Eagle gear on the Eagles sideline. Would you rest people in a Saints game? Would you, play the entire Saints game and then rest them in the Giants game? How would you handle that?
It's hard. I mean, you mentioned Dak's rookie year. The Cowboys were in a similar boat and went to Philly actually in a meaningless Week 17 game. Tony Romo had his final touchdown pass of his career that day.
Yes.
And then they had the bye, and then they lost. And you can argue they came out flat, whatever. It's kind of an annual plight, right? Like every 1 seed outside of the aforementioned Patrick Mahomes usually has to kind of worry about this. I would argue that you're already there if you're an Eagles fan, or I'm already here if I'm the Eagles coach, hypothetically, because this game on Saturday, it is meaningful. There is significance. I would argue it's like kind of 1-2%, but it is not a consequence-ridden game. You're not living and dying with this game the way you even were a week ago against Chicago. And so that's a fair worry. I mean, this Eagles team, I think, has kind of squashed every reason to be concerned. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, that has come for a lot of teams. I don't know the precedent for a team that has had this long, you're mentioning a month, 5 weeks between games of consequence, that has come out and not looked somewhat slow. And that's not to say they'd play, slow for all 4 quarters of that divisional matchup, but maybe
Right.
maybe a half, maybe whatever. It's hard. And so I think, it's a funny little twist for the Eagles specifically in that, that Saints game, if they lose, it impacts their draft pick, or if they win, it impacts their draft pick. I mean, you can kind of look at it that way. And so I think you have to play all the way up until week 18, and I think you got to be ready to call the dogs off in the third quarter. I mean, that's obviously been the Eagles' thing all season long, is getting up big and kind of chilling and coasting. But I think you have to be ready and willing. If Dallas Goedert needs another week at this point in time, hey, chill out. You know what I mean? Like, there's no
Yeah.
reason to rush him back. If Jason Kelsey, I know he has the streak, wants to take a snap and go on ice, go for it, whatever the case. This is about a bigger goal. I mean, yeah, it would be cool to go 16-1, but you're in it for a month from now, not for week 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's obviously the problem you want to have, but when you think about, man, a month without a meaningful football game, you got to play them, but you also don't want them to get hurt. But you also don't want them to take their foot off the gas and have to put the foot back on the gas in a playoff game. It's a good problem to have, but it's a really interesting situation. Talked about it yesterday, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a lot more in terms of Eagle land over the next couple of weeks. This game on Saturday, I know that we talk, the wind is taken out of the tires, the air's out of the tires. It's not the, ride or die game where a lot of implication happens from it because Dallas lost and Philadelphia won. It's still a fascinating matchup. It's still a massive football game. And I'm curious if you are feeling extra confident, if you're thinking Dallas refocuses after the Jaguar game, because for instance, it's a long-winded question, but I went back and watched the highlights of the Eagle-Cowboy game, the Cooper Rush game from week 6, or wherever, I think it was week 6, right? Whenever it was.
Yeah,
yesterday. I feel like it's after this big lead, and then back comes Dallas. And they had a couple of really strong drives to get back in that football game. It had not Jalen Hurts driven down the field and scored one last time. It could have really been dangerous for Philadelphia. Are you more confident going into this one on Saturday as a Cowboy fan / reporter? Are you less confident based on the Jaguar game? Where are you at?
I'm definitely more confident than that day, just because of the presence of Dak. I think a little bit less of the defense than I did at that moment in time, but we're also coming off of a game where Jalen Hurts was picked off twice. And, against the team that the Cowboys are very tight with the head coach of. Matt Eberflus obviously spent a long time in Dallas. And so,
yeah.
I wouldn't be stunned if there was a phone call or two over this coming week. But again, I trust the Cowboys to show up when it is most important and most glaring and the stakes are highest. And that's not the case in this game. And the same way, we just talked about, well, Philly's going to go a month. Dallas is in a similar boat. The path is still a little bit longer, but they are effectively going to be the 5 seed in the NFC. And so they will likely, at least in my mind, manufacture their own bye in week 18, obviously because they'll have to play in the wild card round. But it's just unique in that sense. And so do you and again, the probability I think is fairly high. Like today, if you had to take the Commanders or Vikings in the playoffs, I'm sure you take the Vikings, right? If you had to take the Giants or the Niners, we're both taking the Niners. If you had to take the Cowboys or the Bucks, as much as Tom Brady lives rent-free in everybody's minds, we're both probably taking the Cowboys.
Yes.
So
yes.
You've got Dallas visiting Philadelphia in the divisional round. And so that's what makes this weird and fun and kind of interesting, but not interesting. And that, do you show all your cards because you might see this team a month from now in the game of all games? And that game would, for the Cowboys at least, not the divisional round is the Super Bowl. That's the monkey on their back. They can't get past the divisional round specifically. And so it is a weird confluence of events. I think the Cowboys will play to win. They technically have more to earn, more to gain from this game than the Eagles do. And it's at home. I don't put a lot of stock into this, but I don't think they want Philly wearing division caps and T-shirts and in the visiting locker room. Again, that's stupid. But it is all kind of real. And I think I think it would be somewhat impactful for them to know, okay, we can play with these dudes with Dak. I mean, they did play with them, to your point, even with Cooper Rush. And so I think that bit of confidence would be interesting if it does come down to a playoff matchup between the two teams. But I'd had a long-winded answer, and now I have a question for you. At the time of our recording, the Cowboys are favored by 3. I genuinely don't understand that. I mean, and I mean, obviously understanding the way betting lines work, do you think that is an indication that Philly is going to play this soft? That Philly is going to, be willing to shell Jalen in the second half or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I saw that line too, and I was trying to wrap my head around it because obviously I would think Philadelphia should be favored. I think Vegas is playing some 4D chess here, and they're going Philadelphia won, but didn't look so good. Dallas lost, but looked good for the majority of that football game, as you mentioned. I could see Vegas going like, hey, Dallas, bad loss. They're going to really refocus and make sure they're not embarrassed on Christmas Eve. Whereas Philadelphia might go, hey, we just won again, 13-1. We already beat the Cowboys. We're going to roll in there. That's the only thing I can think of because – I mean, on paper, Philadelphia should at least be favored, right? It should be Philadelphia, -1 or -1.5. And I
What was
get
the
that
last game they were dogs in? I mean, is this the
the
first
Vikings
time all
game, I
season?
think it was the Vikings game.
I
Like
mean,
week 2, I asked that
that's
question on my
astounding.
show the other day. It's a long time ago. It's a very long time ago. But they also haven't played any sort of, real serious opponents yet. Like they played hard games. They've had some good opponents. They haven't played bad people. But, the Packer game on Sunday Night Football wasn't necessarily what you thought it would be going into the
Right.
season. The Colts game wasn't what you thought it would be going into the season. And so they've had some different lines overall. But yeah, it's the first time they've been underdogs. And the only way that I can wrap my brain around it is that Vegas thinks the Cowboys are going to be extra focused because of that loss to the Jaguars, and probably so. I mean, I would. You 17-point lead, you blow it in overtime. All of the national media is ripping you, saying you're frauds again. Why don't we just go crush the Eagles on Christmas Eve in front of literally everybody because everyone's going to watch that game and prove everybody wrong. That's my best guess.
I think you're right. And again, I think if you're Philly, like, okay, you lose in Dallas, so what? Like,
Yeah.
we'll just go beat the crap out of the Saints next. And to be clear, obviously the division would technically be alive. I mean, it's alive, but it's not. I mean, we're talking like,
Yeah.
this is not really alive. But if the Giants lose, I think we both think the Giants will lose to Minnesota on Sunday.
Yes.
Dallas plays Tennessee next week on Thursday night. That
Okay.
result is really inconsequential, but I think we both think the Cowboys would win. So as
Mhm.
soon as the Eagles then theoretically beat the Saints next week,
Right.
they're locked in the 1 seed, and Dallas is locked as the 5 seed entering
Mhm.
week 18. And so I would posit that it's probably better for both teams for Dallas to win. Because technically, if the Cowboys win, they're both alive next week. And because the Cowboys play first on Thursday night, they have everything to play for in Tennessee. Philly
Right.
has the 1 seed in the division to lock up on Sunday against the Saints.
I'll never say that it's bad for the Eagles to win, but I get your train of thought there in terms of locking everything up because then it means Philadelphia can, beat the Saints, help the draft pick, and then still kind of decide what they want to do
And
week 18
and it
against the
protects
Giants.
your, like, well, you go a month without playing. You know what I'm saying? You
That's
buy
true. That's
technically
true.
2 more weeks of what is technically relevant football.
I don't like you convincing me to like root, for the Eagles to lose. But you would also get, if you want to go for your argument here, you'd also get the potential rematch in the divisional round, and Philadelphia would not be 2-0 and feeling really good about themselves against Dallas. They'd be 1-1 and be like, man, they got the best of us on Christmas Eve. Now we got to spank them here in Philadelphia.
To that point, though, and that's what this is so unique. I
I
truly
know.
can't recall a situation like this. It's hard, like that. You hear that all the time. It's so hard to beat a team 3 times in 1 year. The Cowboys tried to do it against the Giants in 2007, famously, and failed. The Cowboys did beat the Eagles 3 times in 2009 when they had that
Mhm.
back-to-back, time there in the wild card round as well.
Right.
So I mean, I not to say like it would be cool if you're an Eagles fan to lose, but if you lose, you get rid of all that weird pressure like 3 times in 1 year, and you get to play more relevant football, and you have a motivation to squash the Saints first round pick that you own anyway.
It's a fair argument. We'll see what people think of the argument down below in the comment section. I'm sure they're going to be upset about thinking the Eagles should lose, but it is a really legit argument. Speaking of that 2009 matchup, that was my first ever Eagle game. I was in the crowd in the wild card game. McNabb's last game as an Eagle. It was the back-to-back, right? And we got killed by Romo in his first playoff win. It was horrible. I was young, 2009, so I was like in my teenager, and you're walking out of the stadium in my TO jersey, and I was getting ripped by all the Cowboy fans and yelled at. It was a memory I don't like to think back to, but 2009 brought up a memory there. I want to wrap up by talking about the playoffs, though. And again, you just kind of laid it all out. It's a fascinating situation. It feels inevitable that Dallas will go to Philadelphia January, what is that, 20th weekend, either the Saturday or
Mm-hmm.
Sunday for round 3. Is there any other scenario we can think of where that doesn't happen? I guess they would have to lose to the Bucks in the divisional round. First off, the Bucks are winning the South, and the Cowboys are locked in at the 5 seed after we explained all the scenarios. That is going to be the wild card matchup. That's got to be a big-time favorable game for Dallas, right? You feel really confident about winning that game.
I mean, yeah, but it's Tom Brady is 6-0 against the Cowboys, and
Yeah.
he's Tom Brady. I mean, so like, believe me, I would much prefer that the Panthers or the Saints. I would love it if the Saints wound up winning that division, because that would move their draft. Who cares about their record? They're a division
Right.
winner at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, but I do feel confident to answer the question I think you were getting at. If Dallas loses, they're out. So obviously it doesn't happen. But I think the only way that they're not at Philly in the divisional round would be, I mean, right now would be if Washington shocked Minnesota. And I don't think that either one of us think that that's happening.
Yeah.
And so the only other possibility, I think, is if Detroit gets in. And if Detroit gets in, they're the 7th seed. And I think
Right.
a lot of people would like their odds against Minnesota more than Washington, at least. And so then if the Lions won, they'd be at Philly, and Dallas would probably be at San Francisco.
Okay. Yeah. No, that is the Lions are fun. I think we're both, I don't know. I haven't met somebody right now who's not a Lions fan this year. They're the Hard
Right.
Knocks. You're buying in. They've won all these games in a row. They're a really fun football team. Do you fear Brock Purdy and the 49ers? Let me rephrase that. Do you fear Brock Purdy? Because we fear the 49ers. The Niner defense is really good. I just can't wrap my head around the idea that this rookie 7th round final pick in the draft is magically going to ball his way all the way to the Super Bowl. And I've seen people say that lock Brock. I think Colin Cowherd said lock Brock Purdy into the Super Bowl with the 49ers. That's how confident he is in them. I respect the heck out of that team in general. Debo, Chris McCaffrey, the offensive line, the defense. I just don't buy into Brock Purdy winning enough games in a row in the playoffs to take the Niners to a Super Bowl this year.
I mean, I agree with you in a logical sense, but I'm also a Cowboys fan, and I don't believe in Jimmy Garoppolo, and they had their way with Dallas last year, and
Yeah.
in many ways, they forged this Cowboys team. This is a stupid week to say it, but this Cowboys team was built in the image of being tough and eating glass and not. They were soft, and they got pushed
Right.
around, and they got punched all over by the Niners in the playoffs last year, and so. I would not want to see that team again. I mean, it is Brock Purdy, but it is also everything else. And so, I mean, I kind of like the Cowboys odds better in San Francisco, weirdly, than I do at AT&T Stadium. Cowboys are not the most formidable home field advantage team in the NFL. And so it's possible, certainly. I mean, but yeah, I mean, if there's anyone that could pull off the Brock Purdy thing, it's Kyle Shanahan and the Niners.
Yeah.
And again, as somebody who was a victim of that last year, I'm really not trying to poke that bear. Plus, I mean, I think Sunday night's win was fair, or result was favorable for them. Because if I'm the Niners, I would much rather host the Giants than the Commanders in the playoffs.
Yes.
And so the fact that the Giants have now leapfrogged Washington, that's the sacrificial lamb. So okay, Brock Purdy beat the Giants. Like I even though he's Brock Purdy, I think I'd still take him over Daniel Jones. And so that's an automatic ticket to the divisional round. And so it's hard not to like their odds. And if Jimmy does get healthy enough to come back, you just never know. I mean, I say this with all due respect. I'm more afraid of them than I am the Eagles.
Okay. All right. That's fair. And their defense is playing very, very well. I just can't buy into this idea, at least from a Super Bowl perspective, that Brock Purdy is going to win his wild card game. He's going to go on the road in the divisional round. He's going to go on the road, presumably to Philadelphia, if everything goes well in the NFC Championship game, and win all 3 of those games and not make that critical error where he goes, wait a second, I'm a 7th round draft pick. He hasn't played that way. Like he's thinking that. He's going to think that at some point. I just can't buy into it just yet. I might eat my words, but you never know. Last question here. We'll let you go. I really appreciate this. Score prediction for Saturday. I love asking people score predictions because a lot of people don't like giving them. You always give me a score prediction, which I appreciate. I assume you'll take the Cowboys, but what's the score for Saturday?
I'm only taking the Cowboys because I think they need it more. And to be clear, like on a 1 to 10 scale, they need it like a 2 out of 10, where Philly needs it like a 1 out of 10, because neither is a zero quantity at this point. I think if Dallas wins, I do think it's like a rout, not in that they blow out the full-fledged, full-strength Eagles, but I do think there's some like foot off the gas, cruise control from Philly, live to fight another day. Dallas takes it and everybody walks away, kind of understanding it's a win-loss that feels like a tie. So I could see it being like 31-20, 31-23. If I'll go 31-23. Just, maybe that one possession kind of keeps it fun and interesting. And maybe Jalen Hurts chucks up a Hail Mary at the end. That's like his 3rd interception of the day. And that becomes the weird, oh, he threw 3 picks. Oh, it was one possession of blah, blah, blah. But they squash the Saints next week to win the East.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's, I think that could happen. I hope it doesn't, but I think that's a very fair assessment. I mean, overall, I think we're in such a weird, It's a weird spot. Like, normally I would go into this interview this week being like, oh my gosh, I hate the Cowboys with every, fiber in my being, which I obviously do. We got to beat them. This is so important. If we lose on Sunday, my Christmas is ruined. I was telling people that. I'm like, Christmas is ruined if we lose. But if we lose, it'll be like, that stinks. Okay, let's just crush the Saints and lock this whole thing up and then figure out the rest of the way. So we'll see. Hopefully we're talking again, or maybe not. We'll see. Divisional round, I'll have you on if it's going to be another Eagle-Cowboy matchup. And best of luck this weekend, I guess, although I'll always root for a Cowboy loss.
It would be the most stressful week of my life if the Cowboys and the Eagles played in the divisional round specifically. Again, that like the title game would be weird, but by that point, I'll say this now: if the Cowboys somehow got there, by that point, the Cowboys would have broken through, right? They would have conquered the divisional round, and so like that juice would have dissipated if it was the divisional rounds. But that would be if they won that game, the divisional round in Philadelphia, and therefore Philadelphia went one and done in the playoffs. Right. It would maybe be the greatest Cowboys win of my life. I mean, but yeah, I mean, obviously we'll get there when we get there. Thomas, you're the man. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you and yours. And I wish you health, wealth, and happiness, but like total, pure, unadulterated sports misery.
Of course. I always appreciate it, RJ. We'll maybe talk to you soon.